Hey, thank you for joining us today, for the Forest City Fire Safety and Extinguisher training. A lot of people are not aware that this is a required training annually, so we'll get into it and we'll go from there. So why we are here is because OSHA has under the standard 1910-157 portable fire extinguishers. 1910-157G2, the employer shall provide the education required in paragraph G1 of this section upon initial employment and at least annually thereafter. So as soon as you're employed and each year after, if you have fire extinguishers within your building, your service vehicles, your service trucks, or out in the field, you want to make sure that you have the most up-to-date training because sometimes things change. Only designated personnel who are properly trained are authorized to use a fire extinguisher to fight incipient fires. All others will follow the emergency action or fire safety plan, and this is for your safety. So let's check about some of the things you may or may not know about fire extinguishers, and this is why annual training is important. What type of extinguisher is used for metal fires? You'd see this a lot in foundries, around catalyst and chemical plants, some machine shops that turn forms of magnesium or other flammable metals. It is a Class D fire extinguisher. And 9 times out of 10, your Class D fire extinguisher will look completely different from this fire extinguisher here, where this has a red body and a short snout. Most of your Class D fire extinguishers are yellow with metal handles. A CO2 or BC extinguisher is mainly used for what type of fire? So a CO2 BC is basically an inert gas. It's CO2, carbon dioxide. So what would you use that type of fire extinguisher for if you have experience with it? Electrical. However, it is also used for many chemical fires and used in kitchens because of no dust contamination. As it comes out of the barrel, it's extremely cool. So on electrical, if you have a panel or a box that's sideways up, uh, because there's no liquid to it, you could spray that on electrical. It'll cool down the wires, cool down the shielding of the wires, and put it out in a safe manner. You cannot use a CO2 on anything like paper, leaves, because then you can actually spread the fire to a different area or the embers. Do all fires need oxygen to burn? Answer is yes. Without fuel, without heat, and without oxygen, you don't have a fire. Now, for those that are involved in shops, welding operations, things where you have to do what they consider hot work, maybe you're operating a torch. Usually a hot work permit is good for how long? Now, not all locations will have a hot work permit. A lot of times you can get permit packages from your insurance company. But what this does, it reminds you to check the area for any combustibles. Do you have any type of paper, any type of cloth or material that could catch fire if you're welding and slag hits the ground, even if it hits your pants? Do you have anything to stay, we got to close garbage cans, garbage lids, make sure there's no flammable gases in and around the area. So how long do you think a permit for hot work would be? Generally, it would cover one shift, unless it is required by clients or facilities for each stage of work. But then it would be based on the work. You can get a hot work permit for torch operations. You can get a hot work permit for welding operations, especially if you're stick welding. Now, fire prevention for hot work. When performing hot work, there's different things that you need to consider. If you're welding, you're creating one type of hazard. If you're using torches, you're creating another. Ensure that you have the proper permits if required. If a fire occurs and the work was not properly permitted, you didn't inspect the area for trash, you didn't move flammable liquids out of the way, or prepared for it, you can be held liable for damages or injury. This would not be by OSHA. This could be by an insurance company, co-workers, employers, because if you didn't follow, some types of process. Some facilities require that you post hot work in progress signs, and that alerts people coming into your work area. Hey, no liquid gases, nothing flammable they could put into the area, not to, remove fire extinguishers from that area because they need to keep an eye in case something catches fire. And it's generally lets people know by this sign. When welding, you want to ensure that others in the area are aware of the work you're doing in order they do not bring flammable materials in the space. Painters especially, they may have MEK, they may have paint thinners, they may have chemicals which are flammable. It does happen in some body shops, somebody be working on a body frame, and whether they're grinding, buffing, whatever, they could generate sparks. And if there's people painting, lubricating, if they're working with those chemicals, even at a 5-foot distance, you can sometimes ignite it. So if you are welding, you also want to ensure that you have welding blinds. Grinding, same thing. This is to prevent sparks from traveling to areas, because some sparks, depending on the equipment being used, can travel 10 to 15 feet. It can ignite trash. It could get into people's eyes and faces. But also when you're welding, that sudden flash, you can actually get welder's burns to the eyes. So you'd want to use a screen to prevent sparks from flying and to protect the eyes of people coming around you not wearing a welding hood. Ensure that you have the proper extinguisher for the work and areas that you are in. Remember that some locations, it says plants, restrict the use of ABC units indoors or around some chemicals. Check Section 5 of a chemical safety data sheet to ensure that they're compatible with what you have. So if you're working in a facility, they're within Forest City or around Forest City that may have some chemicals, you want to make sure that you have the right thing. Just like you would not have a water fire extinguisher near any electrical circuitry or any gases or oils, because the oils and gases can float on top of that water and then spread the fire. So what is a fire? Fire is a combustion or burning in which substances combine chemically with oxygen from the air and typically give out bright light, heat, and smoke. So it sounds odd to say combine chemically, but if you look at the right where the oxygen, heat, and fuel is, the fuel, if you think of a candle, the top of that wax has that wick going up. The heat causes the fuel or the paraffin or whatever the fuel source is, it could be a light oil, to come up to this section here. That's called the ignition point. That's where there's enough heat and there's enough fuel with the attached light to it that it ignites. So the fuel source does not actually burn. It's the chemical reaction from the heat on that releases gases or flammable substances once it reaches that ignition point that it ignites. And then the oxygen helps to build it up. To extinguish a fire, you must remove one of the elements. And this is generally accomplished by using a fire extinguisher because, how hard is it to remove the heat? Well, if you have CO2, you can remove the heat quickly. You could cool out the fuel and it will push oxygen out of the air. To understand the triangle, again, here is that candle in motion. If you look right at the base of the candle, you're not going to see, the actual wax being lit. It's that ignition point right there where the heat and the chemicals and the oxygen come together. The ignition point is the lowest temperature at which a combustible substance, when heated, the material below the candle flame, takes fire in the air and continues to burn. Therefore, you aim at the base of the fire because if you were looking at the candle or you saw a fire in the area, would you be able to see that wick? So, to cover everything below that wick, like you saw with that burning candle, it had a wider base in the flame. You want to use the pass method and put the extinguishing agent all through the area. All right, so let's get into another knowledge check. What does the acronym PASS actually mean with dealing with the fire? Well, it's the simple verbiage to remind you what to do. Because so many people, if you watch certain videos, they pull a fire extinguisher, they're shooting at the top of the flame. So the pass method helps you successfully get in and engage an incipient or small fire. First, you pull the pin on the side, aim at the base of the fire or aim towards the fire, because again, you can't see where that wick is, and then you squeeze the handles together and you sweep side to side. So when you're thinking of a conventional fire extinguisher, this type that you're looking on the screen right now, that would be like what's inside of a vehicle or on the side of a forklift. So you'd pull the pin, aim that nozzle towards the base of the fire, and go side to side. If you had a conventional one with the rubber hose, you would hold the extinguisher in place and sweep the hose and the nozzle side to side. How many components does it take to make a fire? If you remember the image of the triangle prior to us, there's three components to make a fire. You have the oxygen, the fuel, which is at the base, and the heat. And remember, the heat causes the fuel to off-gas or develop vapors that when it gets to the ignition point with the oxygen, creates the fire. Which component of the fire is easiest to remove? Well, in some cases, heat is going to be difficult because the area is already saturated with the heat. And what if your fuel is a liquid source? How are you going to remove that? Or if it's a hot metal, you're not going to be able to grasp that. So the easiest would be the oxygen. By displacing the oxygen with either CO2, ABC, you're talking about at the base of the fire or at the burning source so that you can create and remove one section of that triangle. Why is water no longer used in most extinguishers? Well, again, if you think about what we said previously, if you're at a maintenance shop, a gas station, you may be at your own home, you spill gas, oil, anything, it will float on top of the water. So where you may have had like a 1 foot fire, by adding the water, you may now spread that because it's going to get on top and it's going to dispel that flame even further. If you're dealing with electrical fire, you don't want to be electrocuted. You're holding a metal canister that's, shooting out water. You just don't want to do it. And water cools the fuel source only, but may spread liquid fuel or cause sparks or arcs if used on electrical fires. So you have to know the difference between fire extinguishers. Not all fire extinguishers will put out all types of fires. It is just as critical to know what not to use. Again, you're in a maintenance shop, you're at a gas station, you're fueling the vehicles downtown. You may not want to use any type of water. But so what you look at is on the side, you want to look for ABC or BC. If you're working in a kitchen, you'd want to use a K or ABC. So you have to know the difference. To know what type of fire extinguisher you're looking at, an ABC has very specific identifying marks. These are the most commonly used extinguishers. They use a dry powder to dissipate oxygen from the fire triangle. Now, if you look over to the left, you will see that any extinguisher that's listed for A is wooden paper. Remember, a BC you don't want to use on a wood paper fire because you can blow the embers, you can blow the paper and spread the fire further. B is for flammable liquids, oils, gases, solvents. And C, it can also be used on electrical fires. When you look at the fire extinguisher, the difference between the BC and the ABC, they both have a pin and seal, but on the gauge right here for the ABC, you'll not see that on a BC extinguisher. This gauge lets you know that this canister or this cylinder or this extinguisher is properly charged. It's got enough pressure to push the powder out. The BC unit does not have a gauge. You have to actually weigh it and lift it to tell if it's charged. You can look at the inside of the nozzle on a BC, and if it's white, it lets you know it's been used. So when they do the inspections, if the pin's missing, the seal's missing, and it's white, it's been discharged on a BC. So again, with the ABC, you have the rubber hose and you have a small nozzle, and it has an inspection tag. Now, fire extinguishers should have two tags, the inspection tag for per month and then you have an annual inspection tag. With the BC units, these are good for flammable liquids or electrical fires. It uses carbon dioxide to extinguish a fire by replacing oxygen with an inert gas. It also cools the fuel, electrical, or other hot surface areas. So think of this as just a dry ice cannon. Now, when you're looking at this, you'll notice quite a difference. With the top of it where your uh, tags would be, again, there is no gauge, so you're going to actually have this weighed. It, just as the ABC, should have two tags where it's been inspected. It also has that black hose, but then right here you see the cannon. The reason it has a cannon like this, think of like a shotgun. As that gas is coming out very quickly, if you just had it coming straight out the tip of the hose, it would spray and create a cloud around your head. What this does is it, like a shotgun, it causes the gas to spiral so you can focus it and divert it into an area. Now, again, you'll also want to look at this section right here. That's the handle. This system can actually freeze. You'll actually see frost on the end of this as you're using it to put out a fire. And you want to make sure when you check it that these things are not damaged. When we were talking earlier about a D-fire extinguisher, the D-fire extinguisher again is for metals. So if you're working in a foundry, you wouldn't use this for if you were in a shop and you had slag dropping on the ground. You can use water, you could use towels, wet towels, you could use ABC. But what this is for is like if you have any type of catalyst, you're changing out catalyst at a water treatment plant, you're changing them out at a chemical plant. They react with air. So what happens is this fire extinguisher does not project like the ABC powder, nor does it project gas. You'll notice here it has the same rubber hose, but because of the intensity of heat that comes off of a metal fire, you'll have a ceramic handle with a metal rod and cup. You'd place that cup directly over that metal that's burning, whether it's magnesium or something else that you're trying to control, and it will drop the material onto it and then separate the oxygen from the fuel source. Dry powder extinguishers are similar to a dry chemical, except they extinguish it by separating the fuel from the oxygen element or by removing the heat element of the fire triangle. It does this as the material drops down. Think of it turning into a glass and turning into a barrier. However, Class D are for combustible metal fires only. You can't use it on any type of other fire. Not for oil and gas, you can't use it for electrical because of the weight of the material and it drops straight down. When you're inspecting your extinguishers, again, they should have two tags. Now, a lot of people are surprised when OSHA comes in and cites them for not inspecting. The reason is you're ensuring not only under the 29 CFR 1910-157, that they're inspected monthly, but under general duty clause, you're ensuring a workplace free from recognized hazards. So fire extinguishers must be inspected annually, frequently in high risk areas, hot work, metal shops, things like that, and monthly. The 29 CFR 1910-157E2 portable extinguishers or hose used in lieu thereof under paragraph D3 of this section shall be visually inspected monthly. When your fire marshal and them come in, they're not the ones that would cite you for not doing this, but OSHA will. If you missed a month, then that was a month you did not ensure the safety of the facility. If it's on your vehicle, you're required to inspect it. Never remove a mounted extinguisher from its place for hot work or other work. Personnel needing to respond to a fire will look for those belonging in those areas first. And if it's on your vehicle, you definitely want to check it. Think of mud daubers getting in there and messing up and clogging the end of it. Somebody going by and just sticking something in, messing around into the tip. You want to invert them at least once a month because where that powder sits, if it's on a vehicle and you're bouncing and it's compacting it, you want to make sure this thing works. Check the tags, initial it, and make sure it's safe for you to use. Now, the hazards of using the fire extinguisher. If you remember the fire triangle, you'll remember this. Fire extinguishers remove oxygen to put out a fire. It is what you breathe. The job of a fire extinguisher is to break down the fire triangle into non-burning assembly of materials that were previously in their natural state, whether it be oil, gases, wood, paper. Today's furniture is highly flammable. When using a fire extinguisher, dust or chemicals can get into your eyes, your nose, your mouth, and at times throat because of breathing deeply. You get into that panic mode of fight or flight. Your blood pressure shooting up. You're trying to save everybody. You're trying to save the microwave because somebody left that popcorn bag in there for 15 minutes instead of 4. Everything is going on. Make certain that once you get ready to initiate, the extinguishing of a fire, someone contacts supervision immediately after exposure to treat or assist you with potential inhalation hazards and to assist with irrigation of your eyes as needed. So think about this. You're inside of a building and you discharge an ABC. As you see this powder over here on the outside of this 2-story building, imagine you're inside, and you're putting this out. So where you discharged it and this cloud is going around, make sure that you know where your back is. When you attack an incipient fire, have your back to the exit. You don't want to be walking to the side of a fire, start hosing it using the pass thing, and then you can't see because of this being view inside of a small room, inside of an office or building, and now you're trapped and trying to breathe in material that removes oxygen. So always remember when you go into fight an incipient or stage, just beginning stage fire, your back is to the exit. You pull the pin, aim at the base, squeeze that thing from side to side until either you're out or you see the flame is out and you back away. Do not stay in the room with the cloud. Remember, it removes oxygen. The hazards of using a fire extinguisher are simple. First aid is generally done by simply getting out, getting into fresh air, and if you get the material into your eyes, do not use eye drops. Eye drops are for relief of redness and irritation. Just use plain water, irrigate your sinuses, irrigate your face, wash it off. Most people are not allergic or reactive to it. But if they are, you can pull the SDS for your fire extinguisher off your SDS platform there in Forest City. When you're using the extinguisher after you've been trained, you can safely use most extinguisher if the fire is in the incipient stage. And remember, the easiest way to think of incipient is think of an office garbage can, maybe 12 inches, 24 inches high. That's incipient. It's beginning. The incipient is the initial or beginning stage and can be controlled. So when you look to the images to the right here, the incipient stage, you have the bright flames, but look at the growth. You don't have the overhead smoke. You could tell this just started because where the burning material is just igniting and it's starting to flare up and it's starting to spread, it hasn't done so much as it has over here on the growth stages where it's got the smoke. If you have growth like this where it's got black fumes, black smoke, that is not an incipient fire. Take the fire extinguisher with you and back out. Leave it alone. Because if the fire extinguishing media doesn't take your air away, the growth pattern will. The smoke and the burning material and the gases and fumes released. Again, the incipient is the initial or beginning stage and can be controlled or extinguished by portable extinguishers without the need for protective clothing or breathing apparatus. So here, once this is in, discharge your extinguisher, you're back to this door, get out. If it does grow, that's when your local fire department will come in with bunker gear, SCBAs, and then where they're standing up and their head would be in that growth area, they'll still be able to breathe. So as we're watching this, when an incipient fire occurs, and if you look to the fire to the right, I want you to follow along and watch this fire. His back is to the door, hypothetically. And one of the things when I do training or when I'm training, nursing homes, municipalities and all, is we use actual dry chemical because that way they could see how effective it is on certain types of fire. Now, a lot of training agencies will use a gas system that is similar, but what it does is the gas comes up through the water. The student will then come up with the water extinguisher and then put out the flames. But the downside is you never, ever put out a gas fire with an extinguisher. Because once you operate, a fire extinguisher and you put the flame out, now the inside of that building, the inside of the office, the inside of the area is filling up with gas. So now where the fire was contained on that one section of area, you filled that entire area up with and created not only a hazardous atmosphere, but the possibility of an explosion should a spark ignited. Never, ever use a fire extinguisher on a LPG natural gas fire, whether it's on a forklift, whether it's on a tank system. Do not do it. Call 911 and clear the area. Because again, you don't want to create an explosive or hazardous atmosphere. And this is why I don't train with water systems. One, because remember what we said about water. We don't want you to use it on electrical systems. We don't want you to use it on oil and gas. So we're not going to train you to use that and then potentially create a larger fire or electrocute yourself. When we get to the end of this video, I want you to remember this: to successfully put out the fire, ABC, is going to go on there. The dry chem is going to get on. But what happens is where the oxygen and the fuel meets, and if you watch on the back, very back section right here, this is what's important. This is why I chose this video. If you're doing hot work in a shop and wood and other materials catch on fire, don't just go out the door and assume it is completely out. Watch how this fire, it's non-gas, it just reignites. So if you're doing hot work, part of your hot work program is after the welding, after a control burn, whatever is done, you remain 15 to 30 minutes to make sure it doesn't reignite, as you see, which you'll see here in this video. So when an incipient fire occurs, you've already pulled the pin, you've aimed at the base, you sprayed and squeezed the handle, and you swept side to side. Now watch the right side of that fire. See how it reignited? Again, he initially knocked it out by separating oxygen from the fuel. But when you're looking at that fire, again, this is wood and organic materials. He sprayed the front of that, but there was gaps in the back that did not get covered with the ABC material. So once it dropped and it put out the initial flame, it was still hot enough. There was still enough oxygen coming in this back section that it reignited. So if you fight a fire, don't just walk away assuming it's put out. Again, discharge if you're in a building, back up, get somebody else to bring you another fire extinguisher, but be careful because if you didn't get the backside with dry chem, you should already have fire and EMS and everybody on their way, but you're preventing it from building back up. All right. So again, once the fire is extinguished, and you want to stay and watch for an additional 10 minutes on an incipient fire, not an engaged, because there may be gaps where the air can get in, just like you saw in the video, and the fire reignite. You don't want to go out of that building and think, okay, it's done, everybody go back in, and you put them back into an active fire. So maintain one person on fire guard, watch with another fully charged extinguisher while another person makes the required notifications, barricades the area to prevent others from entering or opening windows. Because one of the things a lot of people will do is they'll open windows immediately to get the smoke out. But if you add more oxygen and that fire is not completely put out and cooled, remember it can reignite and now it's got fresh air to burn. So follow the policy for your facility. And remember, pull, aim, squeeze side to side, remain on target because watch that back. He put the front out, oxygen's coming back out, and it's still hot enough to burn. So when we do this training, train every time as if your life depends on it, because one day it will. Thank you for participating. Thank you for being involved. If you have any questions, my contact information is below. Get a hold of Miss Green or John, and we appreciate your time and attention. Thank you.